I have been a glassblower for more than 50 years now. And when I started in 1971, you could really say that I was pretty low tech. I was living in a teepee in northern Vermont. And at the time, I was trading my glass for food. And that's how I survived for the first couple of years. But by the mid-70s, I purchased a ramshackle farm in western Massachusetts. And then suddenly things began to take off where I was selling my glass in Massachusetts and as far west as New York. And but at some point, Rosalind and Jimmy Carter used my wine goblets in the White House for a state dinner. And then Life magazine picked up and had photos of my work, and the Corning Museum picked up my work, and I started selling glass further and further, as far south as New Jersey and as far west as Ohio. But it kept growing, and when I moved to western Massachusetts, to this old farmhouse, it was so different than the teepee because I had hot and cold running water and electricity and a phone. And the phone began to ring. And by the mid-'80s, I was actually selling work in Japan and Europe and literally kind of all over the world. And by the late 80s, they came out with answering machines. But they were just so impersonal. I just would not get one. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. But yet there would be phone calls at noon in Germany, at 6 o'clock here in the morning. So I began to answer the phone with fake accents and fake voices and take messages. One night the phone rang and I said, "Hello, what do you want?" And this perfectly nice woman's voice said, Is this Peter? And I said, "No, my name is not Peter. My name is Olga. Iznichko Ivorskaya Gupta Mehmet Aliaga Punyvatana. You got the wrong number, lady. Hang up and try again." And most people at this point would have hung up. But she said, "I'm so sorry. I thought you were Peter. I'm looking for his wife, Amy." And when she said that, Amy had worked in my studio a few years before. And I said, "Well, if you want to find Peter and Amy, you must look in the Ashfield telephone directory. But when you get your friend Amy on the phone, you have to say hello from Olga Iznichko Ivorskaya Gupta Mehmet Aliagar Manopunyvatana." And she said, "I don't think I can say that name." I said, "Oh, it's not such a bad name. We practice it." And I made her practice that name. Now, there's something in my personality that if you are gullible enough to believe anything that I've told you, I will just keep on after it. And I made her repeat this name over and over again, and she got it. She got it. We hung up. I never broke character. And later on that night, she reached her friend Amy on the phone and said, "There's this really weird man at the place where you used to work." And Amy goes, "That was my boss. That was my old boss. He's too cheap to buy an answering machine, and he answers the phone call." Anyway, so Katie, at this point, decided that she'd been had and that she decided to call me back. So I answered the phone again. "Hello, what do you want?" She said, "This is Russian KGB, and there have been numerous reports of glass breaking, and your number's up." And I said, I'm not Russian, I'm Bulgarian." She said, "We do them too in your history." And we began to talk. I learned her name is Katie, and I said, "Well, sometime, if you'd like, you can come visit the studio. I'll give you a tour." And she may never have done that, but she was finishing up her PhD. By the way, she was in the Air Force and had come from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. She visited a friend of mine, a scientific glassblower, Sally, and she told Sally the story about meeting this weird man on the phone. And Sally was a completely hopeless romantic, said, "You have to talk to this guy." And Sally picked up the phone and dialed my number and just put it in Katie's hand. And so sure enough, Katie showed up at my studio. This is the week between Christmas and New Year's in 1990. And I was actually on the phone when she walked in the door, and she was wearing one of these holiday Christmas sweaters that basically guarantees that you'll never, ever find anyone to be with you. But for me, for me, it was literally love at first sight. And it took Katie quite a long while for her to come around to that point of view, but months, as a matter of fact. But when we first met, she actually told me that she was thinking about becoming an astronaut, which is next level delusional. But sure enough, actually 2 years later, out of 2,700 applicants, she was chosen. 3 women were chosen to be NASA astronauts for the class of 1992. And Katie's made 2 space shuttle flights on Space Shuttle Columbia, and her last flight was with the Russians on board a Soyuz rocket, where she spent 6 months living on the space station. And our youngest son is 24. And Katie's here tonight, but she couldn't find the sweater. Thank you.